January 18, 1945. Berlin, Germany. Reich Chancellery Bunker. January 18, 1945. Berlin, Germany. 40 feet beneath the ruins of the Reich Chancellery, the air smelled of concrete dust, machine oil, and stale tobacco. Outside, Soviet artillery struck the city in rolling waves. Inside, time seemed frozen. A single desk lamp illuminated a heavy oak table, where grainy reconnaissance photographs lay spread in careful alignment. Adolf Hitler stood rigid over the images. They showed something no German pilot had yet encountered in combat. An aircraft so large it looked unreal. Wings stretched wide and smooth like steel blades. Four engines hung beneath them with a symmetry that suggested overwhelming power held in precise control. The Americans had given it a name that carried both arrogance and promise. The B-29 Superfortress. For several seconds, no one in the room spoke. Not the intelligence officers. Not the Luftwaffe generals. Not the engineers summoned in secret. Only the distant thunder of artillery filtered through the bunker walls. Hitler slowly lowered one hand toward the photographs. His fingers traced the outline of the unfamiliar machine. Then, quietly, he spoke. "This changes everything." That was what the official report later recorded. But that was not what truly happened in that room. The real reaction was removed from the files within hours. Several witnesses were reassigned within days. One was later listed as missing during an evacuation. The true words Hitler uttered when he first saw the Superfortress have never appeared in any surviving transcript. And yet, those missing words would quietly drive some of the final secret decisions of the war. If stories like this reveal a side of history few ever hear, subscribe to WW2 Never Told German Files and tell where you are watching from around the world. The photographs had been taken thousands of miles away over the Pacific. They showed the Superfortress flying above cloud cover with a steadiness that unsettled even seasoned reconnaissance analysts. It was not the size alone that disturbed the German command. The Reich had seen large aircraft before. It was the promise written into the shape of the machine. Range, altitude, endurance, precision. This aircraft was designed not to survive. It was designed to dominate. The officer who delivered the photographs had not slept in 30 hours. His boots were still damp with melted snow. His hands trembled faintly as he stood at attention beside the table. He had crossed a burning city to deliver images that did not yet belong in Europe's war. The Americans, he explained, were using this new bomber to carry the war directly into the Japanese homeland. Entire cities were falling to a machine Germany had never faced. The implications spread across the room in silence. If this aircraft could reach Tokyo, it could one day reach Berlin. But that was not what seized Hitler's attention. His gaze fixed on a small detail beneath one wing, a shape so subtle that several analysts had initially dismissed it as shadow. He leaned closer. The room held its breath. No one knew what he saw, but something in his posture changed. His rigid stillness gave way to an almost imperceptible tension. What he recognized in that instant would not be shared with the men in the room. He stepped back from the table and ordered the photographs locked away under highest classification. Within hours, copies vanished from multiple filing offices. Entire paperwork trails were quietly destroyed. Even in a regime built on secrecy, this reaction was extreme. The Superfortress had not merely alarmed him. It had triggered recognition. 3 days later, a covert gathering took place deep within an underground research complex outside Magdeburg. Engineers who had not been summoned in years were ordered back into service. Weapons projects that had been shelved as impractical were revived overnight. Laboratories that had gone dark were suddenly operating around the clock. Officially, the reason was simple. Germany faced a new kind of air threat. Unofficially, the reason was far more disturbing. Among the engineers called in was a quiet aerodynamicist named Ernst Keller. He had survived most of the war in technical obscurity. He was not a party member. He avoided attention. But when he examined the Superfortress photographs under high magnification, he noticed something the others missed: a cooling vent placement. It was subtle, efficient, elegant, and impossible. No American design bureau should have arrived at that configuration in the time they had. Keller's hands began to shake as he reached for a faded schematic locked away in his personal archive. The drawing had been confiscated years ago after the scientist who created it died in a mysterious factory explosion in 1939. Or so the records claimed. The match was perfect. The vent on the American bomber mirrored a German prototype that was never supposed to exist beyond experimental paper. A design that had vanished with its inventor. Someone had taken that knowledge, and someone had delivered it to the enemy. By the end of that night, Hitler was informed. He did not rage. He did not accuse. He simply issued a new order. The engineer who created that vanished design was to be located, not to be interrogated, not to be recovered, to be erased, dead or alive. What followed was not a manhunt in the traditional sense. It was a quiet war within the collapsing structure of the Reich. Intelligence files were reopened. Old accident reports were re-examined. Transport logs from 6 years earlier were pulled from dusty vaults. Witnesses who had signed death declarations were quietly questioned again. Patterns began to emerge. The explosion that supposedly killed the inventor had occurred during a blackout. The body had been burned beyond recognition. The burial had been rushed. Several factory guards present that night had later been transferred, then killed on the Eastern Front within months. The more they searched, the more unstable the official story became. At the same time, Allied intelligence began noticing something equally strange. German radio traffic was shifting. The language was tightening. Entire message chains were collapsing into brief coded bursts that did not reference bombers, cities, or troop movements. Instead, they repeated sequences of names: engineers, metallurgists, aerodynamicists. Some were long dead. Others had vanished from records entirely. At the center of the growing storm of confusion stood the American Superfortress, a machine that had never dropped a single bomb on Germany. And yet, somehow, it was already shaping German decisions more deeply than many weapons it had. Far from Berlin, on Pacific Island runways, still half carved from coral and mud, young American crews trained on the B-29 without knowing the effect their aircraft was having on the highest levels of enemy command. Mechanics crawled through its pressurized compartments. Pilots learned to manage engines that burned hotter than anything they had flown before. Gunners practiced tracking at altitudes where the sky faded toward black. They believed they were training for Japan. They had no idea that their aircraft had already unsettled the leadership of a collapsing empire thousands of miles away. Back in Berlin, the officer who had first delivered the photographs lay awake in a temporary barracks beneath the city. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind. The way Hitler's eyes had narrowed. The way his hand had paused at that single detail beneath the wing. The sudden shift in the atmosphere of the room. He understood then that the Superfortress was not just a bomber. It was a message. And Germany had understood it in a way no Allied planner had anticipated. But the true meaning of that message remained hidden. For now, the dead engineer who was not dead. The name first appeared in a transport ledger dated October 1939. It was buried among routine factory transfers and emergency evacuations. A single line of ink that should have meant nothing. But under scrutiny, it changed everything. The man recorded as deceased in the explosion had never been listed on any verified burial registry. No grave number, no fingerprint record, no confirmed remains. The German intelligence officer studying the ledger felt a cold pressure settle behind his eyes. For 6 years, an entire death had existed only on paper. The Superfortress cooling vent had reopened a grave that never existed. Inside the underground complex near Magdeburg, the remaining engineers worked beneath flickering lights and failing ventilation. Their task was not to build a copy of the American bomber. It was to understand how it had become possible. Page by page, they reconstructed the vanished design lineage. Each calculation brought them closer to the conclusion they could no longer avoid. The lost engineer had not died. He had been taken, and someone inside the Reich had helped him escape. At the moment that realization became unavoidable, the first purge began quietly. Files disappeared from desks. 2 clerks were arrested for misfiling documents that had never passed through their hands. A senior transport officer was found hanged in his quarters before interrogation could begin. The search was tightening inward. This was no longer an external betrayal. It was an internal disease. If stories like this uncover the hidden fractures inside history, subscribe to WW2 Never Told German Files and tell where you are watching from right now. The reconstruction of the vanished design moved forward in fragments. Cooling systems, heat dispersion mapping, pressurization flow models. The more the Germans rebuilt the missing logic, the clearer the origin became. This was not stolen theory. This was perfected application. The fingerprints of the missing engineer were everywhere inside the American bomber. He had not merely contributed. He had guided. Far from Germany, inside secure Allied development facilities, a quiet consultant known only by a restricted codename moved between departments. He never appeared in official photographs. He signed no public documents. His access badge opened doors that even senior officers could not pass. Most assumed he was American. Few ever asked. Those who did were never given answers. Back in Berlin, the collapse accelerated. Soviet artillery cut deeper into the city each day. The Reich Chancellery bunker trembled under near constant pressure. And still, Hitler demanded updates on only one matter: the missing engineer. Not the Eastern Front. Not the collapsing Western defenses. Not the Allied bombers now crossing German skies daily. Only the vanished creator of the impossible cooling system mattered to him. When investigators traced a break in the original security logs from 1939, they discovered a single overlooked anomaly: a power failure at the factory lasting exactly 12 minutes. During that gap, 3 trucks exited the compound without inspection. 1 never returned. The convoy had been rerouted toward a coastal extraction point. The documentation ended there. At the precise moment this discovery reached intelligence headquarters, Allied code breakers intercepted a transmission that made no tactical sense. It carried no reference to troop movements, no mention of cities, no reference to bombers or submarines. It carried only names: engineers, metallurgists, aerodynamicists. Some were long dead. Others had been missing for years. And one name at the center had been officially buried in 1939. If the unseen men shaping the machines of war matter to you, subscribe to WW2 Never Told German Files and tell where you are watching from around the world. The message was short, encrypted, repeated twice across separate frequencies. When Allied analysts finally broke it, the implication was immediate and terrifying. Germany was not hunting a bomber. It was hunting minds. Within days, 2 unexplained Allied disappearances followed. A materials specialist vanished after leaving a late shift. A technician never returned from a transfer assignment. Officially, both were listed as administrative losses. Unofficially, counterintelligence teams were activated across multiple bases. The war had grown a hidden second front. Inside the German command structure, suspicion now infected every department. Engineers avoided eye contact. Officers traveled with armed escorts. Even routine laboratory testing was conducted under guard. Everyone understood that the search for the vanished engineer was no longer about technical knowledge. It was about silence. Hitler had realized something devastating. The Superfortress was not dangerous because it could bomb cities. It was dangerous because it represented a future Germany could no longer reach. The missing engineer embodied that lost path. And the fact that he had chosen the enemy made the betrayal absolute. If history's most powerful weapons were shaped by a single decision, subscribe to WW2 Never Told German Files and tell where you are watching from. Across the Pacific, the B-29 program struggled under brutal realities. Engines overheated. Runways collapsed under the bomber's weight. Entire squadrons were grounded by mechanical failures. Yet with each correction, the aircraft grew more reliable. Each solved flaw echoed knowledge that Germany recognized as its own. Pilots learned to climb above enemy interception ceilings. Pressurized cabins allowed crews to operate where earlier bombers could not survive. The Superfortress became not merely a weapon, but a platform that rewrote the architecture of strategic bombing. And at the center of those refinements stood the quiet consultant no one fully identified. German intelligence made a breakthrough when a captured Allied courier revealed fragments of a transport route that ran through neutral territory. The path pointed westward, toward a place Germany could no longer reach. The implication shattered the last illusion. The missing engineer had fully defected. He was not a prisoner. He was a collaborator. If that secret betrayal still echoes through history, subscribe to WW2 Never Told German Files and tell where you are watching from right now. When this confirmation reached the bunker in Berlin, witnesses later reported that Hitler stood in silence for nearly a full minute. No rage, no outburst, no accusation, only stillness. Then he issued a new order that stunned the remaining command staff. Germany would not attempt to destroy the Superfortress. Germany would imitate it, not as a weapon, as deception. The final project would not carry bombs. It would carry confusion. A single aircraft built to mirror the shape and performance of the American Superfortress. Designed to fly once, only once, long enough to trigger misidentification across Allied radar networks. A phantom. The implication was chilling. Even in collapse, Germany intended to distort the enemy's perception of reality itself. Work began immediately inside a sealed hangar, whose location would later vanish from surviving maps. Engineers worked under armed guard. Supplies were rerouted from collapsing fronts. No markings were applied. No serial numbers assigned. The aircraft that took shape there was designed to exist without history and without record. At the same time, the list of hunted names expanded. The missing engineer was no longer alone. Anyone who had ever touched forbidden metallurgy, heat exchange, pressurization physics, or high-altitude fuel systems now appeared on German transmission fragments. The Reich was no longer chasing one man. It was chasing the future. Allied counterintelligence intercepted only fragments of this new operation. Whispers of imitation. Echoes of impossible specifications. The idea of a phantom bomber circulated through staff rooms like a rumor no one dared document. It sounded irrational. And yet, the Superfortress itself had once sounded irrational. The war, behind the war, had now fully emerged. One side was racing to end it with overwhelming force. The other was racing to bend perception itself. And somewhere between them stood a man officially dead in 1939, guiding one side and hunted by the other. No one yet knew where this chase would end. But it was already clear that the final reveal would not occur in the skies alone. It would emerge from the ashes of records never meant to survive. The phantom that left no shadow. By the time the phantom aircraft reached its final stage of assembly, Berlin no longer resembled a capital city. Smoke stacked against the winter sky like a second layer of clouds. Streets had collapsed into craters. Rail lines twisted like melted wire. And yet, beneath a sealed hangar, hidden beyond the reach of most Allied reconnaissance, the last great deception of the Reich took shape in silence. The aircraft had no markings, no insignia, no serial number. Its shape mirrored the Superfortress with unsettling precision. For engines mounted in the same positions. Wings stretched wide with identical sweep and curvature. Even the profile of the fuselage matched the American bomber, so closely that experienced radar analysts would be unable to distinguish one from the other at operational altitude. This machine was never meant to fight. It was meant to lie. The engineers who worked on it were forbidden from discussing the project outside the hangar walls. They slept in rotating shifts beneath armed guard. When one technician asked where the aircraft would be deployed, He was removed from the project that same night. His name would never again appear in any official roster. The intention was simple in concept and terrifying in implication. The Phantom would fly a single mission. It would appear on Allied detection systems. It would be tracked, intercepted, and misidentified. Then it would vanish. The confusion it produced would ripple across command structures already strained by the accelerating collapse of a European war. The goal was not to win the war. The goal was to fracture certainty itself. Deep beneath the ruins of the Reich Chancellery, the final intelligence brief concerning the missing engineer reached Hitler in late March of 1945. The report confirmed what he had already begun to accept. The man officially buried 6 years earlier was alive, not hidden, not captive, active, embedded inside the Allied war machine. Guiding the refinement of high-altitude bombing with precision Germany could now only imitate. Witnesses later recorded that Hitler did not react with outward rage. His fury, by that stage of the war, had grown cold, controlled, surgical. He ordered the Phantom flight approved. The engineer, if captured, was to be returned alive. Only after the Phantom mission, across the Atlantic, the Superfortress crews prepared for missions that would soon reshape warfare forever. They studied navigation routes across open ocean. They learned to manage pressurized cabins at the edge of survivable altitude. They trained for operations no bomber crew in history had attempted at this scale. And within the program, the silent consultant moved from briefing room to briefing room, correcting small inefficiencies, refining cooling tolerances, adjusting airflow at angles almost no one else questioned. To the Americans, he was a brilliant engineer. To Germany, he was a ghost that refused to stay buried. The Phantom aircraft was rolled onto the runway under cover of darkness in early April. There were no ceremonies, no documentation, no official launch authorization that survived beyond that night. The engines ignited with unfamiliar smoothness. Even the sound mimicked the Superfortress. The aircraft lifted once into the night sky. Only once. No surviving pilot logs remain from that flight. No authenticated radar tracks have ever been publicly released. Yet scattered fragments of after-action reports from multiple Allied sectors recorded something impossible. A Superfortress-class signature appearing where no American squadrons were scheduled to operate. Fighters were scrambled. Interceptors reported visual contact at altitude. Then the signature vanished. No wreckage was recovered. No crash site identified. No confirmation ever issued. The Phantom aircraft left behind only contradiction. As Berlin collapsed in the final weeks of the war, frantic attempts were made to evacuate sensitive material from the bunkers below the city. Trucks disappeared into fire-lit roads carrying documents that would never be cataloged. Among them was the personal effects case of the intelligence officer who had first delivered the Superfortress photographs months earlier. He never reached his destination. When his case was later recovered from the remains of a bombed convoy, his diary had been burned nearly to ash. All but one line had been destroyed by fire. If they have built this, then the war we are fighting is not the war we think it is. The meaning of that sentence has never been fully explained. The missing engineer was never recovered. No death certificate was ever issued. No Allied tribunal ever listed his name among defectors. And yet, fragments of his work continue to echo through post-war aviation development. The Superfortress itself went on to deliver devastation across Japan. Cities vanished beneath firestorms. New strategic doctrines were born from the bomb bays of high-altitude bombers. And when the atomic age arrived, it arrived riding in the form of a Superfortress. The Phantom aircraft, however, vanished from official history almost as completely as the man who inspired it. Some believe it was destroyed on its single flight. Others believe it landed in a remote strip and was dismantled without record. A few still argue that it reached an unknown destination and vanished into silence. What remains beyond dispute is this. When Hitler first saw the American B-29 Superfortress, he did not simply see a bomber. He saw the future of warfare written in metal. And he saw the proof that Germany's future had slipped beyond his reach. That unseen realization did not change the outcome of the war, but it reshaped how the final months were fought. What truly happened to the missing engineer remains locked behind sealed archives and vanished identities. Whether he died in obscurity or lived to watch the world his work reshaped remains unknown. The Superfortress still stands in museums today, silent and towering. The phantom bomber does not. And the words Hitler truly spoke that night beneath Berlin remain unrecorded. History remembers the machines. It rarely remembers the ghosts who built them. If this story made you question what you thought you knew about the war, subscribe to WW2 Never Told German Files and tell where in the world you are watching from.